I'd like to welcome you all to the 2024 Kinmonth Lecture held at the Vascular Society. My name's Rob Sayers and I represent the Society on the Council of the Royal College of Surgeons of England. And this lecture is a gift from the college to the Vascular Society, and hence we are asked to wear the college ceremonial gowns. The idea of the lecture is to commemorate the life and works of John Kinmonth, who was a notable past president of this society, but also served on the English College Council, and he was a professor of surgery at St Thomas's Hospital. He made many great contributions to vascular surgery, particularly in the field of peripheral vascular disease, and of course his seminal work that some of you will be aware of was about diseases of the lymphatic system, and he was one of the first people to describe the clinical relevance of that. Every year, the President and the Council, many of whom are here on the front row, select an eminent lecturer to come and deliver this lecture. And I'm very pleased to welcome this year Professor Mahmoud Bhutta, who's sitting down here to my left. He is the inaugural Professor of ENT Surgery at the local Brighton and Sussex Medical School. But in addition to that, his title includes the fact that he is a Professor of Sustainable Healthcare. And to the local hospitals in the area, he is the Clinical Green Lead. He has a long-standing interest in environmental and labour rights harm issues caused by medical supply chains. And it's notable that not only does he have these accolades, but he has associations with other medical schools and universities here and abroad, including the universities of Cambridge and Liverpool, and abroad Zambia and Malawi. The title of his talk is Green Surgery Process and Products. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what he has to say, which is relevant to surgeons in general and vascular surgeons in particular. So I'd be grateful if you could welcome Professor Bhutta to the stage to give the 2024 Kinmonth Lecture in the usual way.
Thank you, Rob, for your kind words. And it's indeed an honour to be here and to be able to speak to you about some of the work that I've been doing over the last several years, in fact. So, I am an interloper. I'm an ENT surgeon. Thank you for allowing me to speak here. But I've obviously read a bit about Kinmonth, and clearly you all know more than I how much of a pioneer he was. I don't share much in common with this pioneering gentleman, and I'm trying to link things together. The only thing I can say is my first ever job as a house officer was actually in vascular surgery, where my registrar was a young Rachel Bell, who I'm sure you all know. And I apologise to Rachel for being so incompetent at that time. I suppose the only link I can think with Kinmonth is he was trying to discover something that is perhaps hidden. His seminal work on looking at the lymphatic system, that which we cannot see, and perhaps climate change, is also something that is a bit difficult because it's not so easy for us to see. And I'm going to uncover some of the truths behind what we cannot see, in particular my interests related to supply chains. So my work here, in fact, starts back in 2006 when as an SHO, I wrote about some of the problems with our medical supply chains, particularly around labour rights issues, and I'll come on to talk to you about that. But also, back then in 2008, I wondered if the NHS needed to be a bit greener. It was rather obvious that throwing things away in particular was not good for our planet. Climate change is all hot news. It's nothing new. The first paper to describe the possibility of climate change was written in 1932 from England. By the 1970s, it was absolutely clear that this was happening. I read about this when I was a teenager. So, unfortunately, I hope we all see that this is the truth. I was honoured last year to chair a national report into green surgery, badged by all the surgical colleges. And if you want to look at the evidence behind what we could be doing to make surgery better, then you can read that. It's an evidence-based review, the first review by any specialty anywhere in the world to outline a roadmap. But there's plenty more to do. This is just what we could do now. We need to rethink things. And so within that report, we include everything that you might think of in a surgical care pathway. And obviously the best thing is public health. For you, of course, that's going to include stopping people smoking. It's going to include streamlining care pathways. It's also going to include what you use during the procedures. And I'm going to come on to show you some examples, particularly related to my issues around medical supply chains. So we all see this in our operating theatres, of course. We are there. We see the waste as a physical and obvious example of what we are doing and the harms that it causes. To put that in context, we dispose of 240,000 tonnes every year of clinical waste, the vast majority of that from hospital. That's in England alone, and is dominated by linear consumption. The only data we have suggests that 3/4 of what we use is disposable. Now, of course, some things will be disposable. They will be contaminated in ways that we cannot get rid of. But there are many things, I think, that we can reuse. And of course, those of us who are a bit older will recognise that it was not always this way. Here's some data from Cassie Thiel's lab in the US, who I collaborate with. She looked at different approaches, this is from our systematic review, different approaches to a hysterectomy. And you can see that the more traditional approaches, a vaginal approach, an abdominal approach, the carbon footprint of those approaches is much, much lower than once you move to laparoscopic approaches and robotic approaches. Why? Well, the A there is anesthesia, and in that study they were using desflurane, a toxic greenhouse gas, which you may be aware of, is now banned in the UK because it is so environmentally destructive. So that A would be much reduced, and what we got in F there is that red line. That is the production and use of single-use equipment. It is good that we move to minimally invasive approaches. It's good that we move with technology. It does not need to come with this reliance on single-use products. There are lots and lots of reusable laparoscopic instruments that are now creating reusable robotic instruments. Why was it this way? If I tell you that robotic arms, I'm not a robotic surgeon, robotic arms are programmed to be used 20 times and that's it, they turn off. We've taken them apart. There's nothing wrong with that robotic arm, but hey, maybe I want you to sell you another one. We did some analysis. This is Chantal, who did her PhD under me. We carbon footprinted the products used in the most common operations in the NHS. And what we found is that 2/3 of the carbon was due to single-use products. So this is the agenda that I'm trying to put forward. And I'm talking to you here about carbon as the most common metric that we measure of environmental damage, but there are other harms from over-materialization. And to show you that it doesn't need to be this way, I do work in other settings, particularly low-resource settings, and we need more data from that. But here's some data on cataract operations. A cataract performed in the UK has a typical carbon footprint of any operation, 180 kilograms of carbon dioxide. That's driving a car from London to Edinburgh, a petrol car. That's just one operation. If you perform the same operation in India, at a centre of excellence, it's had 30-fold lower carbon. They use highly efficient systems, basically like a throughput of factories, and they reuse almost all of their equipment. From their audit of the first 2 million operations they performed, they have lower rates of infection than the ophthalmologists in the UK report. So if you want the best standard of care by cost, by carbon, by quality standards, it is India, not us. And people often think about different approaches to a circular economy. What I'm talking about is where we keep materials in the system. We don't continue to extract them from our planet and throw them away with all the harms that that creates. The best thing is not to use it in the first place, of course. So there is a lot of overage. People open things that they don't use. Perhaps there's some things that we don't need. And surprisingly, if you don't use something, you save 100% of the carbon. Some companies will try to tell you, if you reuse, it's going to be worse for the planet because you have to decontaminate and sterilize it. A systematic review shows that in healthcare, reuse saves between 38 and 56% of the carbon. That's including everything, the decontamination and the transport to decontaminate. You are not going to get any better way to reduce your environmental impact from all your solar panels and all these other things you hear about. You must move to reuse where it is safe to do so. And recycling seems like a lovely physical, visual aid of what we're doing. We can put everything in a recycling container, it all goes off to recycling heaven and the whole world is saved. Your recycling at home recovers at best 3 to 4% of the carbon. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but don't think that by recycling everything, it's going to be the solution. And in healthcare, it's much more difficult. Complex, multi-component products, perhaps contaminated. What else? I've spoken to you about carbon dioxide as the most common metric. But there are other environmental harms from our overuse. We estimate that 2% of global plastics are used in healthcare, and what they do is plastics, all plastics, release microscopic shards, and this is becoming a real cause for concern. There are microplastics in every indoor environment, but in the operating theatre, they've been found to be 3 times higher. They have been found in every single human tissue ever sampled. They will be in our lungs, in our guts, in our liver. We don't know exactly what harms they cause, but we do know they can cause persistent inflammation. And we may actually be injecting plastics. The top right there is a microplastic in an IV bag. There are thousands of these. Every time you give someone IV fluids, you're injecting them with a non-natural substance. Other compounds, such as PFAS, which is like a Teflon on your pans. This is called a forever compound. It waterproofs your drapes and gowns. If it gets into your body has no way to remove it. It stays in the environment for hundreds of years. And DEHP, a compound that's used to soften plastics, can be found also in wastewater coming out of hospitals. This is an endocrine disturber. This is going into our bodies. If you're drinking plastic bottled water, you're drinking an average of 240,000 microplastics and quite likely toxic levels of DEHP. Tap water. Free market economics also occurs if we outsource, if we want the cheapest possible price for things. Why would we pay a lot when we're going to throw something away? So, as we find for other things, such as our clothing, we engender what's called global value chains. We want to outsource to the lowest possible area, and that usually means not in Europe. Here are some bandages coming off a production line in Mexico, and they're going into 6 different boxes. The box on the right is a big US brand. The box on the left is a local Mexican brand. It's exactly the same product, just branded and sold to us. The problem is when we outsource the global value chains, there are risks of labour rights harms, and it's very difficult to get data on this because up until recently, after a lot of lobbying, we were not allowed to ask where the products are manufactured. But Norway, collaborating with them, actually put in place contractual requirements because they were outside of the EU, they could actually ask where are your products manufactured. And of the 29,000 items, despite being contractually obliged, nearly half of the companies didn't say where their products are manufactured. Maybe they didn't want people to know. Maybe they didn't actually know themselves because they just sell you the product. But where we had the data, half of products are manufactured in countries with a known high risk of labour rights abuse. And I'll come on to show you that's not just theoretical, it's real. So how have we got to this idea of this throwaway economy? And I think there are 3 main components. The first of all is that perceived risk of infection. And sometimes that risk is true, but I'll come on to show you that that perception is not always true. Second, there is the economic drivers. We think it's cheaper to throw things away. And again, I'm going to show you that that's simply not true in most circumstances. And the final thing is a human and physical resource for reuse. So actually if we don't have the infrastructure available to allow me to reuse this, then it's easier to just throw it away and more convenient. I'll give the example of PPE. Of course, this all became so apparent during the pandemic. And we have history here. Back in the 1990s, those of us who are old enough to remember, there was this scary message, this virus is going to come, it's called HIV, it's going to kill us all. At that time, glove use went up. Before that, people did not really wear gloves, but glove use went up. Of course, HIV is not spread by skin contact. And then we had this other pandemic, of course, recently, where we were told to wear ridiculous amounts of PPE, and I'm sure, as many of you are aware, there is no evidence for it whatsoever. The SAGE committee, I've looked at their evidence. All the evidence was on hand washing, and instead they told everybody to wear all this PPE. It probably put people at risk. It's a respiratory virus. You can wash your hands. You probably need to wear a mask, although, unfortunately, a mask also releases an average of 3,000 microplastics into your lungs whilst you're wearing it. Glove volumes are unnecessarily large because we have this culture of glove wearing. Prior to the pandemic, we were wearing, in the NHS in England, 1.7 billion every year. I've calculated, if you put those end to end, that would almost stretch to the moon, just in 1 year. The carbon equivalent from the first carbon footprint of PPE that we did shows that gloves alone, equivalent to driving a car around the world 8,300 times. But we know that 60% of glove use is inappropriate. You only need to wear gloves when in contact with potentially infected bodily fluids. But people put on gloves just to move a patient. You just need to wash your hands. There is no dirt there. And actually it puts patients at risk because we know that when people put on gloves, they touch everything and they forget to wash their hands because these are magic gloves that kill all the bacteria. 70% of all gloves are manufactured in Malaysia, and the rest, most of the rest are manufactured in China and Indonesia, very little in Europe. So during the pandemic, we saw huge amounts of glove use and huge increases. So Malaysia is now creating a new oil refinery with up to 300,000 barrels of oil per day from Saudi Arabia to meet our need. I don't see this as part of a healthy future. Here's Top Glove, the world's largest manufacturer of gloves, 2 billion, coming into the NHS. This is their factory compound, 32 factories in this area in Malaysia. And if you go behind the scenes, although this factory looks okay, these workers are all immigrant workers. They are migrants, typically from Nepal and Bangladesh. We've got data from surveying 1,400 of them. 40% of them have paid illegal recruitment fees to get this magic job because they are desperate for work. Typically $2,000, sometimes up to $5,000. Some of them have sold land for this golden opportunity to come and work in Malaysia and get out of poverty. They typically work at least 3 months without a single day off. They will work in temperatures of up to 70 degrees Celsius for 13 hours a day. Historically, they had their passports confiscated for safekeeping so that they are controlled. They are not allowed to go anywhere except to the factory accommodation, which is provided by the factory. Here's another company called Brightway. This is probably the worst accommodation I've seen. These were coming into the NHS as well. These workers lived in shipping containers for 3 years of their life whilst they paid off that debt. Their entire existence is to live in this shipping container, to be transported by a van to the factory, to work in the factory, and to come back to this again. Mental health issues were severe. I will not show you the pictures of the workers beaten if they complain. Quite likely you have worn these gloves on your hands. And I'm showing you some examples, but the abuse of migrant workers is endemic in Malaysia. Every single one of these glove manufacturers has the same problem. These are rebranded and sold to us. I am confident that almost every glove you have worn was made using forced labour. You can read our report. Textiles. Again, we have these ideas around infection control. 93 million drapes and gowns are used, actually that's in England, and the vast majority of those are single use. And I really, really don't understand why. Because we have the ability to reuse. But there's some strange ideas. The British Orthopaedic Association, I'm in conversation with them. Thin cotton drapes have no place in orthopaedic surgery. Of course not, because they are pervious to water, but cotton has not been allowed as a substance for drapes and gowns in surgery for over 3 decades. This is still the current advice. All health textiles must be made of plastics. Cotton is obsolete, unfortunately, although there are people trying to look at alternatives. They must meet these European standards throughout their life cycle. Reuse is typically 55 to 75 times, 1/3 of the carbon. Why is everybody not using reusable drapes and gowns? In Austria, 90% of people do. Here's the liquid penetration, microbial penetration. They must meet these standards throughout their life cycle. There is no reason for you to wear and use disposable drapes and gowns, except perhaps you've been marketed this stuff. If I tell you that I wrote to one of the leading suppliers to the NHS and asked them to explain their statement that it was the only safe way to protect against infection, and that statement is no longer on their website, then you can understand that perhaps they are treating us all as fools. Drapes and gowns must meet the highest standards in the world. HTMO 104, they are sterilised by the same steam sterilisation used for your instruments. It's not good enough for you. Why are you operating? Because your instruments go through the same process. During the pandemic, we threw away lots of gowns. The disposable ones, we found some of them were made in China using state-sponsored forced labour from North Korea, where between 70 and 100% of the salaries of these North Korean workers who went over the border to work in China were sent back to the North Korean state. 1/3 of workers in North Korea work under state-sponsored forced labour. Metal instruments, a bizarre idea that we can just throw these away. 52 million of them in the NHS are just thrown away. Accident emergency, go in, let's stitch up a wound, and let's throw those instruments away. Outpatient clinics, perhaps you use disposable metal instruments. I'm trying to change this. We have changed this in my hospital. Even removing sutures, pair of scissors, let's throw it away. Again, we have a scare. We have a scare in the 1990s where there's inconsistent or inadequate sterilisation. People are actually sterilising things in these tiny little autoclaves at the back of their rooms. Then we have this thing that's going to kill us all. It's called CJD, prion disease, and it was a scare. In genetically susceptible individuals, it is fatal, but it has not materialised. It does not exist anymore. We have no evidence that it is in the population. But we got rid of our sterile services, and rather than dealing with the inadequate sterilisation and bringing those standards up, most hospitals got rid of things, and they just thought, maybe we'll just throw things away. So the modern standards, HTM 01, the highest standards in the world, they monitor for prion, it doesn't exist. They monitor infection, it's all safe, it is automated. But you still throw things away. 70% of the world's surgical instruments, including the reusable ones, which are rebranded and may be sold to you through Germany, but they were manufactured in Pakistan. This is the north of Pakistan, which produces 70% of the world's instruments, and this can only be described as sweatshop labour. These workers will be paid between $1 and $2 a day. They only get paid if they work. They go into debt. They will take loans. They get bonded in labour. Injuries are not unusual, sometimes minor, sometimes serious, sometimes entire arms torn out. Who cares about the health and safety? We'll just throw those instruments away in A&E. Of the 50,000 labourers, we know that several thousand are children, and I've seen 7-year-olds working on these grinding machines, making these instruments that we throw away. These children are usually the firstborn son. They do not go to school. Half of them are illiterate. We've interviewed some of them. They hate this work. They complain of pain in their back. They complain of the metal dust that they're inhaling. They want to go to school. They want to have a future. They want to play cricket in the street with their friends. So I always say, when we throw things away, we throw away money, we throw away our planet, and we throw away human dignity. The economics of this, hey, it's cheaper, let's throw it away. We have this bizarre idea in the NHS where we fragment everything by place and time. Almost, in most cases, of green. If you invest in something that lasts longer, over those few years, you will save money. But we annualise our spending, so we can't invest for the future. We also compartmentalise our costs. So I'm buying drapes and gowns in the operating theatre, that's my cost. What about the costs of the waste? Oh, that's not taken account of. The NHS has recently undertaken a full analysis of reusable drapes and gowns and found that it's half the price. In that green surgery report, we reviewed 142 case studies, and in almost all cases, they saved money. It won't always be the case, but in general, the principle of going green is the cheaper option. Companies may actually feed into this economic model of just throwing things away. So here's the economics of planned obsolescence. Here's a drill. It's called System 7. Very soon, System 7 will no longer be supported because the software and the hardware, no, you don't need that. You need System 8. I've been shown these inside of System 8. Can you tell the difference? No, but we have to have it. Here's something called a harmonic scalpel. It's a dissector. Electrosurgical, £600, single patient use. That's fine, throw it away. I'm not paying for it. Can't possibly be made reusable, except there's an organisation called the Association of Medical Device Reprocessors. They actually do remanufacture these, and I've been there. What they have to do is change the pads on the end of the dissector to allow it to be reused. Actually, your theatre nurse would be able to do that. But you can't reuse it because inside here is a chip that only allows you to use that for 6 hours, and it can never be used again. So they have to open it up, put a new chip inside to allow reuse. But eventually it fails because it's made of plastic, and the plastic does not withstand steam sterilisation. If they'd made it of metal, there's no reason this could not be used hundreds and hundreds of times. The NHS pays. You can also use regulations to try and say, hey, let's throw this away. The manufacturer decides whether you can reuse something. So here we go. You can't possibly reuse these pair of scissors. That would be crazy. Let's label it that you can't use it, and then it would be illegal or on you if you were to reuse these scissors. So we throw 5.9 million scissors away in England every single year. Of course, I can tell you where those scissors are made. So to finish, what are the policy and practice solutions that we are working towards? And it's a difficult, complex problem. We produced a report earlier this year that outlines the evidence why our strategy for maximising reuse of equipment is the best way to protect our planet, as well as all the other advantages I've told you. Last month, I'm glad to say the Department of Health actually recognised this and said we are committing to this. Lacks the detail, but at least we've got an idea that this is going to be the future. What we need is to align everything to preferentially purchase reuse. And I'm in conversation with the biggest supplier, NHS supply chain, to say we should state we will always buy reusable where that option exists. We need infrastructure developed nationally for decontamination, sterilisation to enable that. We need the regulators, the MHRA, I'm also in conversation with them, to say no, you're not allowed to get away with just making something disposable on a whim. We need to protect labour rights. I haven't got time to go into it, but I'm glad to say I've worked with a number of collaborators, and we've managed to get $150 million repaid in the legal recruitment fees to those workers working in the gloves industry, working with governments across the world. And we need to invest and create the change. So I am in my hospital trying to introduce a policy where reduce and reuse is default. If you want to say you will not reuse, I don't care about your personal opinion, I'm afraid. You have to present to me the evidence. We'll see how that works out. But we've just started, and I'm already saving over £300,000 every single year. We've created an alliance of 5 hospitals across the south that are going to do the same, and I'm trying to create a scoring mechanism for all trusts across the NHS on their reuse of equipment. Wherever it is safe to reuse equipment and is environmentally preferable, and we have the evidence to show that, you should be doing it. And we will create a public scorecard for all trusts. I'm working with ENT UK to expand this list where we develop the evidence for my specialty, ENT, but this is not about ENT. And I would encourage other societies, perhaps the Vascular Society, to also release this best practice. And although these policies seem a little bit distant from reality, everything we do perhaps seems distant from reality. But I hope that I've at least persuaded some of you that what we are doing in healthcare is damaging both to human health and to our planet. Thank you for your time.
Mahmoud, that was thought-provoking. I think you've opened our eyes. It's harrowing at times hearing what's going on. And I think you've inspired us to think about change. So I'm delighted on behalf of the Vascular Society and the College to present you with this medal that reflects a fantastic contribution to actually changing how we think. Mahmoud, thank you so much.